Introduction to Philosophy, Lecture 19, The Turing Test. This is the first lecture on Unit 4, Free Will, Determinism, and Responsibility. Before getting into the first reading, let's briefly evaluate some of the concepts covered in the introduction to this new unit in our text. The problem of free will and determinism is an old problem that is still very much alive. In the metaphysical discussions of free will versus determinism, many of the themes from previously discussed arguments reemerge. The chapters in this unit will have implications for God, persons, reality, and our status as moral agents. Free will, which was key to our last discussion where we showed that God could exist despite the challenge of evil, is a concept that many of us take for granted without questioning, until we are made aware of the recent advancements in the sciences and the logical consequences of metaphysical arguments that we will be discussing in future chapters. Free will can basically be thought of as the ability to choose between different courses of action that are actually possible. In the previous lecture, we argued that in order for good to exist, humans must have free will. If humans don't have the freedom to choose good or evil, then good cannot exist. If all humans were created only to choose what is good, then no moral choices would ever be taking place. If no moral choices were taking place, then no actual good would be taking place. It would just be a program running. In other words, there would be no moral value to any actions of pre-programmed entities. In order for an entity's actions to have moral value, the entity must be able to choose between moral and immoral actions. If it turns out that we do not actually have free will, then not only are humans not much different from amoral computers, our argument for the compatibility of the existence of God with the existence of evil also unravels. Determinism is basically the idea that the present and future are only compatible with one course of events, completely determined by past events. We will analyze evidence and arguments for this as we progress through the following chapters of this unit. It will be helpful to have a basic understanding of the different views involved in the metaphysical discussions of free will versus determinism. 1. Incompatibilism. Incompatibilism is the view that free will and determinism are incompatible. An incompatibilist can view this incompatibility in a number of ways. One way an incompatibilist might address this issue is to argue that determinism is false, so free will is possible. Another way is to argue that determinism is true, so free will is impossible. Another way, referred to as hard incompatibilism, is to argue that free will is impossible regardless of whether determinism is true or not. We will cover evidence, arguments, and reasons for each of these positions in future chapters. 2. Compatibilism. Compatibilism is the view that free will and determinism are compatible. Compatibilists can also approach this discussion in a number of different ways. Some may argue that free will is possible in spite of determinism, while others may argue that determinism is required for free will to be possible. Referring back to these views to become familiar with them will be beneficial to keep their distinctions clear when we analyze them individually later. Moving on to Chapter 19, the first chapter in this unit, entitled The Turing Test, covers some of the brilliant ideas of Alan Turing. Turing was an early English computer scientist, philosopher, and mathematician who is sometimes called the father of computer science and artificial intelligence. Turing wasn't just a brilliant philosopher and mathematician who made all of our modern computers possible, he was also a hero. During the Second World War, Turing worked with the Allies, cracking Nazi codes, leading to a faster defeat of the German army, and saved countless lives. Even though Turing directly contributed to some of the most important aspects of modern life, such as the security and might of the free Western world and technological advancements that led to breakthroughs in almost all areas of science, communications, and entertainment, he was eventually betrayed by his age and his country. The UK justice system chemically castrated Turing for being a homosexual, which may have led to his suicide only 2 years later. It is an absolute historical disgrace that a hero and one of the greatest, most influential minds of all time suffered such a fate at the hands of a world that benefited so much from his existence. So, the question at hand is, what do computers and artificial intelligence have to do with free will or metaphysics and epistemology in general? With regard to free will, if all things are determined, then our minds may resemble computers in some troubling ways. Exploring our understanding of minds and computers could give us some insights into the types of beings we are and what artificial intelligence could be, and if AI is even a conceptual possibility. Discussions of AI are also helpful to classical metaphysical and epistemological questions, such as, do other minds exist? How can I know that other people have minds? The famous Turing test, also known as the imitation game, is a simple test he proposed where you interrogate two subjects, one human and one machine. If the machine can trick you into believing that it is a human, then it is intelligent. As philosophers are expected to do, Turing considers many objections to his view. I'm not going to cover every objection here, just those with the most value to the extent that they'll be the most beneficial. The mathematical objection, for example, is one that I'll pass over, since technologies like ChatGPT take a lot of the persuasive thrust out of this objection. The argument from consciousness, on the other hand, is usually our most common and intuitive objection. AI can be used to do many of the things that people historically argued were uniquely human and that computers could never do, such as write poetry, music, create art, and so on. But that doesn't mean that the machine is conscious in any sense. It may be producing content, but does it know it is doing so? Or is it just selecting ones and zeros according to rules based on input? It doesn't seem to understand, know, feel, or desire, and we have no reason to suspect it has any qualia. But according to Turing, this doesn't really matter. We can't tell for sure that other people have any of these either. We just suppose that they do based on their behavior and claims, but we can never know for sure that other people actually have minds. Secondly, Turing is proposing we determine machines are intelligent in the same way we determine other people are intelligent. We talk to other people, we get to know them, and if their responses are sufficiently impressive, we determine they are intelligent. Furthermore, this overlooks or discounts the possibility of an unconscious intelligence. And it could be the case that AI will amount to just that, an intelligence that is not conscious. The Lovelace objection is another interesting one with metaphysical implications. She says that a machine can only do what we know how to order it to do. In a sense, that is right, even with modern computers, but as Turing points out, that doesn't mean it is impossible to code a program to respond to input reflexively and make adjustments based on these. Again, like ChatGPT, this could serve as a basis for a kind of learning. It may even be possible to give a program kinds of motivations. In the end, this may be more similar to humans than we give credit. Not only does it not pose a problem to Turing's test, our own original work can, as Turing says, sometimes be the growth of a seed planted in us by our teachers, or the effect of following well-known general principles. These analogies go both ways. Not only is it helpful to discuss AI computer programs in terms of teaching it something, in cognitive science, we sometimes describe the mind-brain relationship in terms of a software and hardware relationship. And if determinism is true, then we may be much more similar to computers still, since our software is merely responding to the world's input. The argument from continuity in the nervous system is another interesting objection that has to do with so-called hard AI and soft AI, but it is also reminiscent of a more interesting discussion that I will link here and below. The last two arguments we will look at here are modern classics that you will likely come across again if you continue to study either cognitive science or philosophy of mind, namely Cyril's Chinese room thought experiment and Nagel's what it's like to be a bat argument. Taking each in turn, John Searle proposed this thought experiment to counter theories regarding so-called strong AI arguments. One such argument proposed in our text goes as follows. The appropriately programmed computer with the right inputs and outputs would thereby have a mind in exactly the same sense as human beings have minds. The experiment begins by describing a computer capable of processing Chinese character inputs and producing Chinese character outputs so well that Chinese speakers are convinced that it is a real Chinese speaking program, so it passes the Turing test. Therefore, according to these strong AI theorists, since it is an appropriately programmed computer with the right inputs and outputs, it should have a mind in exactly the same sense as human beings have minds. But if we change the situation slightly, we might reconsider. Say an exact duplicate of the program were written out in an instruction manual in English, and you don't have to speak or read any Chinese. You're in a room disguised as the computer, but instead of having a computer system analyze the characters, follow the rules of the program to arrange other characters as response outputs, you manually go through the exact same process that the computer would and produce the exact same output that the computer would. You would of course still pass the Turing test, but it should be clear that the strong AI claim that your manual system has a mind in exactly the same sense as human beings have minds is false. There is no understanding of Chinese in the Chinese room. You have not understood any of it. Even the outputs you've produced following the rules for arranging characters are meaningless to you. Similarly, there is no one to understand the Chinese inputs and outputs in the computer example because it is merely running the same matching operation that you were. So, it doesn't make any sense to say that the program has a mind in the same sense as human beings have. Therefore, the result of the experiment shows that the program cannot give a computer a mind, understanding, or consciousness, regardless of how intelligently or human-like the program may make the computer behave. However, this isn't a problem for the Turing test since it was never intended to indicate consciousness or understanding, only thought or intelligence when considered in isolation from other mental qualities. Recall that Turing's guiding question is a variation on the question, can machines think? As decisive as Cyril's objection to strong AI sounds, there is another famous thought experiment that could be employed to salvage it. Thomas Nagel's "What is it like to be a bat?" thought experiment could be repurposed as a response to Cyril's Chinese room. According to Nagel, for an organism to have consciousness, it must have qualia, that is, a unique subjective character of experience. If something or someone has consciousness, then we should be able to ask ourselves, what is it like to be that thing or person? It wouldn't make sense to ask, what is it like to be a brick? Because bricks don't do anything or experience anything. They have no modes of perception. However, people and other mammals do. Bats, for example, have a sense that humans do not have, namely echolocation. Echolocation works like sonar, and bats' subjective experience of this is unavailable to us since we do not possess this sense. If we try to imagine it, We have to visualize it in terms of the senses we do have, like vision or audition. However, vision and audition are not echolocation. Even if we could experience it, the experience would be as ourselves, not as bats. It would be our qualia, not a bat's. This is the veil of perception again, and as we've discussed before, it cannot be lifted. Turning this line of reasoning back towards computers and the Syro-Chinese room, perhaps there is, or could be someday, a sense in which computers do experience something, just in a radically different mode of experience than those available to us. In the following lectures, I will try, along with our text, to explain why scientists and philosophers take these challenges of determinism to free will so seriously, further clarify the analogy of human minds to computers, and the wider implications in other branches of philosophy.